think you need to think, what are we giving up? What is really happening in our space? And with that, I bring you Darwin. Let's welcome Darwin.
Thank you, Bill. Can everyone hear me? It's not too loud. Okay, cool. Like Jay was saying, this is actually a pretty old adage. I mean, in life history, anywhere you go, this is true. Has anyone in here ever sent money to a Nigerian prince? It's been around for about 30 years. The other thing, not Wi-Fi related, but how much, the question was asked, how much is your information worth? Does anyone know how much it is for every person that gives their zip code when they go to a cashier and buy something? I think the last figure was around 2009. Someone estimated each time you give that zip code to the cashier it's worth $5 to that company. They're making money for something you're freely giving them. In this case, now with Wi-Fi, the prevalence of Wi-Fi is pretty widespread at this point. We are living in a place where you're going to be using your cellular phone, but the data is limited at that point. So as soon as you get any Wi-Fi coverage, you're going to jump onto Wi-Fi as quickly as you can. Is there any way we can turn this off? Sorry. Anyway, so most people jump on Wi-Fi because it doesn't cost you money on your cellular plan. However, they're giving out Wi-Fi for a reason. When you're going to like Starbucks, why are they giving out Wi-Fi? You guys know? Well, they just want you to come in, drink coffee, and hopefully if you stay there for 2-3 hours, you'll drink a couple more cups of coffee. I've seen the guys that bring the computer and stay in all day nursing one cup. They kind of don't want that customer, but everyone else, they want you to come in and work as long as you can and actually spend money while you're using your Wi-Fi. So before that, one question you probably have is, who's this guy talking to you? My name is actually Darwin Makatia. Most people can't pronounce the last name, so don't worry about it. But I am one of the network administrators. I'm on San Antonio College. So when something doesn't work, it's probably my fault. I'm also a part-time instructor for server management and network security in the electronics division. I also do volunteer work for one thing that Jay is involved in is the Western Regional Collegiate Cyber Defense Competition. This is a yearly competition where students from different colleges will group together and they'll try and defend a network against hackers. Guess who the hacker is? I'm part of the core team, one of the red team members that breaks into your computers. One story that was great was we had one team looking at their screen. I broke in, started moving their mouse, they freaked out. Just completely got lost. I'm also a developer for the USCC, US Cyber Camp Challenge. I actually worked on their capture the flag. This is when, with the cyber defense competition, it's really for defense. They're trying to secure a network. With the cyber camp, a lot of it is attack-based. They're learning how to hack into stuff. So basically, I designed a vulnerable network that mirrored a large-scale corporate network. It was all on VM, but this allowed them to use their skills to break in and see what they got. And people that did pretty well, I think last year on the competition we worked on, several of the people got hired by some of the defense companies out there. So, good way to weed out some of the people. I've been in information security for about 10 years, working in and out. Jay mentioned that I worked in IT in other companies. I've been doing IT for 15 years. And part of that is data collection on the back end. We were offering free services. But with that free services, we were watching where your visit, what websites you're visiting, keeping track of it in cookies, keeping track of it in a database, and from that, figuring out what the demographics are and selling that demographic off to marketing companies. Last, I'm also, GIAC is a certification that's known worldwide, a fairly technical certification, but I'm a certified wireless auditor. I know at least how to secure as much as you can secure protocol that's being broadcast out there for everyone to see. And also I know how to break into, a lot of the techniques used to break into wireless networks. And we're going to be going over some of that today. So, one question for you guys. How many of you guys use Wi-Fi now? Almost ubiquitous, right? Wi-Fi is just, I don't know how you could live without it. I got my first device in 2000. It was just some device. They were insanely expensive at that point. They're in the cents now for the chips. Back then I spent about $200 for my equipment, just for a card to get it onto a Wi-Fi network. So another question for all you guys, what do you use on Wi-Fi? I see some laptops out there. Anyone have smartphones that they connect with Wi-Fi? You're using Wi-Fi, you're not using your data plan, right? As much as you can. Of course, laptops. We're going to go over a lot of the players that are there. iPhone and Android, I'm assuming, for your smartphones. Anyone still using Symbian-based ones? No? No one's using a Nokia or an Ericsson? Okay.
Only when I travel.
Only when you travel. There's also Blackberries. If you were business-based 2-3 years ago, Blackberry was the major player in that space. Who here has set up their own access point at home? Fairly large crowd. I'm going to ask you guys another question later on about how you set it up. So let me introduce the major players in the market space right now. So one of them, one of the things that we're seeing now, for the most part, is on the Gartner study, most of the phones in this year are Android. That's what's being sold on the market. iPhone still has a lead. However, Android's being outsold. They're being outsold by Android right now. So if you're talking about newer phones, Android has most of the market. Apple still has 18% of the market. This was taken in September, early September this year. So I don't know what the 4S did. I mean, people were lining up for that. That figure could have changed. Surprisingly, Symbian machines are still being sold. That's why I was surprised no one raised their hands. But those are the Nokias, the old style phones. Most of the market for Symbian, it's not really a smartphone, or we don't call it a smartphone anymore. About 10 years ago, we would have called it a smartphone. But most of that market are the folks that just want the free phone. They don't want data. They don't want anything else. So there's still that market. They're still making money. This is mostly if you're working already, but who has a BlackBerry device? No Blackberries. Blackberries are still used in the corporate marketplace. A lot of people will still use that because that's what's supported. Us IT folk, we don't like change. If stuff changes on us, we have to relearn a whole bunch of things. And a lot of times we're just lazy. So the last, one of the things that isn't shown here, because the market is so small, is Windows. This is the Windows mobile devices, Windows. They were one of the more, they were a smartphone when they first came out, a combined PDA cell phone. If you still have Windows mobile phone, I feel sorry for you. But those you probably should upgrade because they will have vulnerabilities at this point. Just because smartphones are dominating a lot of the market, a lot of the web traffic is not really dominated by web phones. So I'm counting laptops as mobile devices because people are bringing those to other places and using it on Wi-Fi. So Windows 7 has a large part of the market, about 34%. Vista is fairly small because it was only out for a year and a half, and everyone hated it anyway. So there's a small market for that. Windows XP. Who has Windows XP still? Shame on you. Upgrade. Seriously, this is end of life. You're going to, as soon as you're on the internet with one of these, if you're using open Wi-Fi, they're not guaranteeing that they're firewalling you. You're going to get exploited. So upgrade. The total market for Windows is 79%, 80%. So they're the biggest player still on the web. OS X, as much as they're catching up, they're still less than 10% of the market. And Linux, who has Linux out here? These are the geeks guys. They're probably also going to be the future IT folk. They are less than 2% of the market. As for mobile devices, iOS still has the majority of the traffic, about a little under 3%. Android only hits about 1.18%. Symbian and BlackBerry, they're almost negligible. It's more than likely the others are people hacking their user agent identity, so you don't know what they are. So mobile devices still have a minor part of the market. That's probably more because they're not actually visiting specific websites. They're going to Marketplace or they're going to an app store. So you're not seeing that kind of traffic on the companies that are taking these statistics. Once again, this is from September 2011, so fairly recent. Like I said, the major factor in a lot of this stuff is the operating systems that use Wi-Fi in the first place. In Windows, these are the vulnerabilities that we should be concerned with. First of all, Trojans. Everyone know what a Trojan is? Yes. This has been around for a good 20 years now, so most people know what a Trojan is. It's basically an application that is pretending to be something else. When it gets installed, it does something it didn't tell you it would do. The other thing is a remote exploit. A remote exploit is a vulnerability in your operating system, and like I said, Windows XP will have these problems. Android will have these problems because the vendors are not upgrading as fast as Google is updating. But what a remote exploit allows an attacker to do is attack your computer without you even giving permission or doing anything extra. When it's a Trojan, it's really your fault, because you're the one that installed that Trojan on by downloading something that was not kosher and putting it on your machine. A remote exploit, kind of your fault because you're not updating, but in some cases you can't control that when the vendor isn't giving you the updates. But a remote exploit is not entirely your fault. It's a problem with your operating system, someone hits it, and they take over your machine. The next problem is a browser exploit. Has anyone seen what a browser exploit is? What a browser exploit does is if you go to a website that's hosting something malicious, something bad, it'll take over that browser at the very minimum. There are tools out there that go further than that and will go in and take over your whole machine in the first place. And what the bar for doing a lot of these things have dropped quite a bit. You have script kiddies out there that can do all of this just by clicking the button. The last thing is the applications themselves. All those programs that you've installed legitimately. What is more legitimate than Adobe Acrobat? Those applications a lot of times introduce their own vulnerabilities. They're legitimate programs that are doing what they're supposed to do, but they weren't adequately tested enough, they weren't hardened enough that if someone sends something to that application, it could allow someone else to take over your machine. An example of that is a couple of years back, Windows Picture Viewer from Windows themselves. What the problem is if you view an image that someone has crafted to do something malicious, just viewing that image on a website or downloading an image and viewing it with Image Viewer will pop your box and you're going to be taken over by someone else. The same thing with movies. Like I said, Adobe Acrobat is a major problem. Whenever you download a PDF, who knew before this that if you downloaded and read a PDF, you could accidentally give your machine away to someone else? A couple people. Most people actually don't know this, but if you read a PDF, you don't know what the source is, and if you haven't patched Adobe to the latest version, you may have a problem. OS X. So OS X, not quite as vulnerable as Macintosh or a lot of Mac users claim it is. They are also subject to Trojans because Trojans are your fault, not the operating system. Remote exploits have been found on OS X. Same thing. You don't have to do anything. It will take over. Browser exploits, if you're browsing to places. Who has Mac? What browser are you using? You're using Firefox. Anyone using Safari? You're using Safari. And some people, a couple of years back, people were using Internet Explorer. If you're using Firefox, you're vulnerable to any Firefox vulnerabilities that were on the Windows boxes or on the Linux box. Same vulnerability. So when they say Firefox vulnerability, they're talking about that. Safari, get off Safari. Go to Opera or Firefox. Realistically, they can't keep up. They really can't keep up. Macintosh's main focus is really their operating system, or the iOS, which is the iPhone operating system. So a lot of people switch over. Oh, I forgot to mention, did anyone wonder what this big list is on each of these slides? There's a website called Exploit Database, or exploit-db.com. What it is a repository where everyone puts in the latest and greatest exploits, what's vulnerable on a machine. They'll give credit to who actually wrote it, what platform it attacks. In this case, it's OS X, and the specifics of what the exploit actually does. So in the old days, I would have to collect my own exploits as time went on. I'd have like 2 or 3 exploits I would be able to use. These days, I could have hundreds just going to one website. So the bar has dropped for anyone who wants to do anything malicious. Linux, as anyone meet, well, there are a few of them, but anyone outside of those few Linux users meet any smug Linux administrators?
Yes.
A majority, unfortunately, Unix users had a superiority complex for many, many years. They viewed their operating system as invulnerable because the whole thing is no one uses it, so no one attacks it. But even Linux, and Unixes for that matter, have a lot of vulnerabilities. If you take a look, there's a full page, and it goes on, and it goes beyond 10, actually. Because it's been around for a while. People have been attacking it for a while. So even the geeks aren't as invulnerable as they think they are. iOS, of course, it hasn't been on the market too long. There's a few vulnerabilities. Surprisingly, though, they haven't been attacked that much, considering their widespread use. The main thing is this. Does anyone know what a jailbreak is? What's a jailbreak? But how are you getting root? When you're jailbreaking a machine, you're actually using an exploit. The same type of thing that the attackers are using. You have attacked a closed system with a known exploit and use that exploit to gain root, which is control over that box. So when you're using jailbreak, you're actually using, quote, malicious software or malicious software techniques. So you've already, by using a jailbreak, you've already done what you're not supposed to do. There's one problem with a jailbreak. If you were here for Jeff Holden's talk, the jailbreak can't be updated as fast as the normal operating system. Because once you upgrade from your jailbreak, you'll lose everything you've gained from the jailbreak. So there's all those issues. And if you have a jailbroken machine, you can install anything you want on that machine, including malware. And the malicious programmers can do the same thing. Of course, they're vulnerable to any applications. Apple will vet programs that are submitted to their app store, but that's no guarantee. They only have a certain amount of time to check that software before they release it. They only have a small amount of people checking the software relative to the number of people programming, submitting. So their vulnerabilities could show up in the applications, and those applications are internet applications most of the time. They're going out on the internet and are able to be reached by malicious programmers. So, as of recently, there's quite a few. Is there a way to turn this off?
No, it's facing the speaker.
Oh, I see. Okay, so iPhones are also not immune to a lot of things. And of course, last but not least, will it pop? If I unplug it,
No,
will
no.
it pop?
Because it's
It'll-
control from.
Yeah, it might pop there. Okay. Android is a lot more open than iPhone. It's not. They don't have the walled garden approach. They're using an open source approach, which is allowing everyone to see everything. But when you allow everyone to see underneath the covers, well, sometimes you don't. There's stuff under the covers you don't want to see. In this case, everyone knows. Has figured out relatively quickly how to root an Android phone. Of course, there are Trojans, there are third-party marketplaces that you can go to download software that may or may not be kosher. There have been several times where the thing that was downloaded and is submitted to Android Marketplace is good. Software that does exactly what it's supposed to do. But then they'll auto-update and not go back to the store to pull their auto-updates down. So the Trojan works like this. You put in legitimate software, then that legitimate software that's been checked and tested by Google will go out, pull down its own update without checking with Google and put down some new function that may be advantageous to someone else. Of course, there are remote exploits and application exploits, as explained before. One thing to note, with remote exploits, Android has been pretty good. I'm surprised, but if you have any Android before 2.2, you are vulnerable to a remote exploit. They can hit you from the internet and take over your phone. Now I'm going to go through a quick overview of Wi-Fi's the Wi-Fi technologies used today. And basically, we have open Wi-Fi, web encryption, WPA, and WPA Personal and WPA Enterprise. What I won't be covering is the cellular networking protocols. There's 3G, 4G, Edge. Although even those have been taken over, Wi-Fi is relatively easy to do, but in places like Burning Man, DEF CON in Las Vegas, they brought in their own homemade cell towers, and they perform man-in-the-middle attacks. So basically, when you're connecting, do you know what cell tower you're connecting to? No? Your cell phone will automatically look for the strongest signal or closest signal it can find. When it happens to be someplace hostile like DEF CON, where they bring in their own cell towers, you go, your cell phone, you're not the one that chooses which cell station you're going to. It'll connect to the most powerful one. If it happens to be a malicious one, guess who's listening in on your traffic? So, like I said, we're not going to cover that today. However, Wi-Fi is quite a bit of information already. Open Wi-Fi. Open Wi-Fi is where no encryption is taken set up. For all of you folks that set up your own Wi-Fi at home, how many have open Wi-Fi right now? How many don't know? Just in case. So, open Wi-Fi just means you're letting anyone in. There's a couple security provisions you can make. You can set it up so your SSID is not broadcast. That's the name that your phone or laptop pops up when you're looking for a network. You can set it up so no one can see it. And the other thing that people do is MAC address filtering. Even if you're not doing open Wi-Fi, how many of you guys are doing MAC address filtering on your? Okay, so those are the two provisions that's used. Now, this is what I think of open Wi-Fi. Basically, you're exposing yourself to the world. This is not security at all, although a lot of places are using it. Who's using it? no one raised their hands when they said they didn't set up open Wi-Fi at home. How many people use open Wi-Fi when they're traveling about? I'm pretty sure everyone does. So, yeah, if you're using open Wi-Fi, you're completely open. Nothing's encrypted. People can see what the traffic that's going through. And you're broadcasting. So basically, unlike a wired network where they have to physically tap in, they just have to be around you within about 20, 30 feet. The next iteration was WEP, or Wired Equivalent Protection. This was the first attempt to commercially put in some sort of protection into Wi-Fi, commercially. There were attempts earlier, but these are equipment they sold. The problem with it was its encryption algorithm was pretty weak. Anyone still using WEP? Who's your provider? Time Warner. Did they give you the router, or you set it up as well? Okay. With web encryption, I don't know if you can see this. It's kind of faint, but there's a gate there. It's pretty easy to get around that gate, right? There's a lot of these what we're calling security fails on the web. There's one where I saw one of those parking lot gates that go up and down, and it's in the snow, but there's no actual fence. So you see the tracks going around the gate in the snow. So that's basically what WEP is doing. It's giving you a false sense of security if you're using it. Interestingly enough, a lot of times it's not the consumer's fault. Verizon, their default setting, if you order Verizon DSL and they send you the combined DSL modem / router / wireless access point, guess what they put in as your default setting for security? They're using WEP. The reason why WEP is an issue, can anyone guess how long it takes to crack WEP? Yes?
3 minutes.
About 3 minutes. And that's I've broken it in about 5 minutes, but I was using a dual core Atom processor. So really weak processor. If you're using some of the latest processors, I'm not even sure if it's 3 minutes. It might even take, it just depends on how fast you can pump out the data. Now the going standard, if you're going to really try and protect your system, is WPA or WPA2. The encryption standards used originally was Temporal Key Integrity Protocol, and this is alphabet soup. Who's used WPA on their home systems? Have you gone in and looked at the configurations? If you notice, there's an alphabet soup list of acronyms that you have to choose from when they're asking for the encryption algorithm, or they're asking for the authentication algorithm. What do you guys typically use with WPA? Okay, so TKIP, relatively okay, but you might want to consider changing up to AES.
What about the one that's both of them?
What do you mean?
It says both of them.
Yeah. They'll use either.
It'll use whatever the client is asking. So not so great. TKIP is not exactly, it's no longer recommended. If you want to use AES, or Advanced Encryption Standard, is the government grade. The reason why they came up with TKIP originally was processors were expensive back then. So when they put DSPs into your router, that's actually a little computer that's calculating the encryption algorithm all the time. And it was expensive to put a more powerful processor, so they compromised a little bit and used something that was cryptographically weaker. However, it could keep up on these cheap processors. Nowadays, processor prices have gone down, so you can afford to use extra processing speed to use AES. The reason why they still allow for TKIP is a lot of people don't want to reconfigure their clients. So your old laptop, your mom's laptop, you don't want to reconfigure it, just choose TKIP again. But what's recommended is use AES. The authentication method that's used at home typically is pre-shared keys. That's when you type in that passphrase, it generates a hexadecimal key that gets used by the system to authenticate you. That's at home. That's also called it's usually called PSK for pre-shared keys or personal mode. When we're talking about workplaces or corporations, including the school here, we're using enterprise, which is just a generic word for a whole bunch of different protocols for authentication. The main thing about enterprise authentication, however, is it's using a protected scheme. And that's going to come in important. That's going to be a little important later when I explain how you break into this stuff. Did I lose everyone? So, how is Wi-Fi used? I'm going to go over some of the use cases now, or actually I'm going to ask you guys. On the home network, how are you guys using the home Wi-Fi? I mean, but you're using it for just web surfing, right? It's your personal box, usually your home router. And a few of us that don't have internet will use the neighbor's router. The other place that Wi-Fi is typically used are hotspots. I'm sure all of you are familiar with hotspots, right? You know a few of them. Someone already mentioned Starbucks. There's Starbucks, there's McDonald's, they offer it. Most bookstores offered it when they still were around. But it's available everywhere, from airports, everywhere. The other one that's allowed, that usually provides Wi-Fi, there's municipal Wi-Fi. Some places are starting to provide Wi-Fi for their citizens. What surprised me actually is locally, it looks like Cabina, downtown Cabina at least, is covered. You have open Wi-Fi. You go on there and hop on, you can use their Wi-Fi. But there have been fights all over the country for Wi-Fi lately because providers don't want cities to provide it for free, but cities want to provide it for free. There's of course corporate or work Wi-Fi and school, which we provide for students, workers, and just general use. So now we're going to go to the good stuff, exploitation. This is part of the fun of this job actually. But with exploitation is how people that aren't supposed to be on the system are going to get on the system and exploit it, make use of it, whatnot. The first thing that happens that is available to me to get to look into your information is a form of information leakage. Your systems, almost all Wi-Fi clients will use something called a preferred network list. What a preferred network list is a list of networks you usually connect to, and you're going to see that listing in your network settings. The original clients, what they did was a major problem because it would always broadcast the entire preferred network list, and that's a problem. You're going to tell everyone what your SSIDs are. The newer clients kind of fix this. If you're an open Wi-Fi system that is broadcasting their SSID, the only time it'll broadcast, the newer clients will only broadcast the hidden SSID. The problem with hidden networks is this: they're not going to respond to anyone unless someone asks for them in name. And of course, they would have to broadcast that name so that the access point will respond. But so that's the problem these days, where hidden access points have become actually a problem because now you're broadcasting to everyone what your SSID is. But why would you care if an attacker knew what your network name was? Anyone know? Now there's this tool that I like to use called Wiggle. It's a wireless global location engine. Now if you take a look at this, I'm not sure if this is clear enough for everyone to see, but this is Grand Avenue, and this is Temple. And this of course is Monsac. And the text is a little small also, but all the little red dots that you see everywhere are surveys that are Wi-Fi points that were surveyed and found to be broadcasting. What's interesting here is I'm seeing Linksys, and I'm seeing another Linksys, and another Linksys. I also see Netgear, and a few times I see D-Link. What does that tell you about that network? Their default. They didn't do anything to their router when they brought it home and they just connected to it. What that means is the password is still default. I can look that up anywhere on any manual that's published on the internet. So I can pop onto your network, change your password. You'll never get back in unless you reset the box. The other thing that you'll notice is people that did take the extra time to actually change their settings, there's their ID. So when you are sending out your preferred network list, I collected that. I took that down, popped it into here, and asked, where is this network name? I know where you live at that point. So if I know where you live, and I happen to see you at an airport cafe or a bus stop, what do I know?
You're not home.
You're not home. I know where to rob you. Other problem, not a major problem to you, is denial of service attacks. You've heard of radio jamming, right? Main really low-level denial of service is where I jam the radio and you can't get service. Nothing fun about that, except if you're a practical joker and you just don't want anyone to get on. But there are more sophisticated methods of jamming of getting people off the network, and we're going to discuss it a little later. But there's association floods, forged disassociation, forged deauthentication, and power saving. Once again, power saving is also another practical joke one, not useful for an attacker, except as a practical joke. These three, however, I'll be using in future attacks. So let's talk about that in a little bit. Now, with open Wi-Fi, it's open. I can connect up as an attacker. The problem with that is there's plausible deniability. You don't know who the person that connected onto your network is. Guess what I can do? I could download contraband. I could download copyrighted movies and get you in trouble. The ISP is going to kick you off if they find you in violation enough times. The cops are going to be real interested if you're downloading contraband or going to terrorist websites. So, a couple court cases that have been found. One guy was driving over to some house and just sitting in the street. They were using people's open Wi-Fi to surf for child porn. Guess who gets in trouble? Whoever's access point it is, because that's what they can trace. The other thing that happens is hidden Wi-Fi. What people try and do with open Wi-Fi to make it just a little more secure is they try and hide their SSID, the network name, and they try and filter by MAC. Everyone know what a MAC address is? Okay. MAC address is just how your hardware is identified. Theoretically, each machine on any network has only one MAC address, but that's going to prove false. How do I figure out how to get on? The first thing I have to do is be able to see what the traffic is. I use a tool called Kermit, only available on Linux. It's a passive scanner. A majority of the scanners that you find, like NetStumbler or Wi-Fi Fofung, what they actually do is they send in a request saying, hey, is there any Wi-Fi networks out there? The access points will reply back, I'm an access point, unless you're hidden. But they'll respond back saying what their name is. And then NetStumbler will collect that. But Kermit is a super spy ninja type sniffer. It doesn't broadcast anything. It just sits and listens. And while it's listening, what it's going to collect is, unfortunately the font's kind of bad, but with regular Wi-Fi points that aren't hidden, it just displays. And with this one, which is a test one that I set up that's hidden, it'll put in angle brackets. So it'll tell you what the name of the hidden access points are. And how you do that is you sit and wait until some client connects. When the client connects, they have to announce to the access point, hey, are you the hidden access point, before they can connect. And if I'm listening at that point, I know what your network's name is. The other thing that's interesting about it is I can see the MAC address. It collects the MAC addresses that are broadcasted over the network as well. Now, once I have those two bits of information, your MAC address and your SSID, I can now connect to your network. Because I can impersonate who you are, because under Linux, it's a single command to change your MAC address. Under Windows, you have to download some software, but you can also change your MAC address there. And you can impersonate anyone. So, like I said, open Wi-Fi and its small security measures aren't enough to do anything to prevent anyone in. If you are using encryption, well, I have to do a little more work. Usually with web, it's almost nothing more than just me knocking. The reason why you have to consider this is most access points from the raise of hands are actually quite, most of them are becoming encrypted. So how do you do that? How do you deal with this? Well, if it's web, it's fairly easy. The first stage is I collect some traffic, and there's this tool called Aircraft. What Aircraft will do, this might be a little too small to read, I can collect data on a specific MAC address and capture that data into a file, all the traffic from that MAC address. And then you have to collect enough information, usually about 5,000 to 15,000 packets going back and forth before you can crack it. But I don't want to wait that long, so what I do is I generate some extra traffic. I sit there and pop the access point to make it send more traffic, then trick it into responding to the payment request. And it'll actually generate a lot more traffic really quickly. So within a couple minutes, I can generate enough traffic to crack the web key. Then the last thing is run it through the tool, the main tool, which is called Aircraft. I use all the captured traffic, and if I have enough, and like I said, 5,000 is the minimum, but in this case, I had about 15,000 packets going through, and I can crack it within a couple seconds. So once again, web has become something where it's not secured at all. Cracking WPA and WPA2 is a little more involved. It could take hours, so I didn't actually try it. I've done it before, I just haven't tried it just to make screenshots for this talk. But it's a similar procedure. You're capturing some traffic first. Now the thing with WPA is you can't just capture generic traffic. You have to pull down the authentication traffic, the traffic that they're using to connect into the access point. So if someone's already connected, I can't capture that traffic unless I force them off. I send the deauth packet that I was mentioning earlier on the denial of service. So I force them off the network. What are they going to do if they got forced off the network? They're going to connect back on. During that time, I capture that traffic, and I now have my sample. Now, this is the problem with WPA. I can't just generate from the existing data the key. What I do have is the one-way hash of the key. What a one-way hash is something that takes something that makes sense or has some information. I dump it into a program. It dumps out garbage. But that garbage is unique to that password or key. Since I have the garbage part, I don't have the actual key part, how do I figure out what the original thing was? If you can't, there's no way to reverse it. Well, some smart folk have come up with an idea. If they just took a dictionary, dumped everything into there, and came up with all the hashes, then they just have to search that database and they can find the reverse back to what that key was. So that's how you crack WPA. But me, once again, this is a common theme. I'm too lazy to type. So there's a tool called Jerix. The idea of Jerix is this. They wanted to make something that your grandmother could take and point and click and break into wireless access points. And what it does is exactly that. You can crack that, you can crack WPA, you can specify the type of attack. So this makes it really easy. If you can just read 5 minutes on a page or look at a YouTube site on how to do this, there's tutorials on YouTube already. You can break into a lot of access points that are out there. Now, if I'm on the network, what do you care? That's the problem with the provider, right? Not really, because once I'm on the same network as you, I can send you remote exploits. I can sit in the middle and listen in on all your conversation, and from that, I can go a little further, but we're going to talk about that a little later. Now, if I just don't want to sit there and go through the process of cracking your key and breaking into the network, well, I could make them come to me. I can just make an access point. I can provide it for free, and they'll all connect to me. Most of you will probably connect to an open Wi-Fi port. And how much is the equipment? This is my access point, about 30 bucks. Really small. I can pop it in underneath the desk. You can use it in a corporate pen test by just dropping it under someone's desk, plugging power into USB, plugging this into the network, into their network, and then just having people connect and listen in. So the equipment is real small. The technology is free. I don't know. It gets easier and easier for attackers to get into a system. But beyond that, I might be too lazy to even configure those things. I had that stuff before this came out. There's a tool called Metasploit. Metasploit is part of a big exploit framework called Metasploit. Metasploit is great. It can break it without knowing anything. You can break into Windows systems that are unpatched. You can You can take over people's browsers. You can listen in on the network. But for this talk, we're just going to concentrate on the wireless portion of this. What the Metasploit module will do is it'll sit there and listen. When someone requests, hey, I want to go to my home network, SSID, it's going to respond going, I'm your home network. And when that's the case, okay, go ahead and connect. You connected. Once you connect to that network, it's going to automatically send in remote exploits to your machine to see if you're vulnerable. It's just being nice. But the next thing it's going to do, it also sets up a sniffer. So it's listening to all the traffic that's going through that network. So if you've connected, it's listening in on everything. The other thing it's going to do, well, I've already said it sets up the access point. It sets up DNS. Anyone know what DNS is? The main name service? So for those that don't know, the main name service is how you find everything on the internet. On the internet, all servers, all the websites like Google and everything, they're represented by numbers. How does your browser or your computer know that www.google.com goes to that number? It uses what's called a domain name service. It goes and asks the DNS server, hey, who has this address? If the DNS gives back the address, and then your computer can go directly to that address. Well, if I control the DNS, guess what? I can tell you to go wherever I want you to go. It also sets up a fully fake web server so that I can trick you into signing into your Bank of America website, make it look exactly like that. Or I can run exploits on your connected client. Now, I'm going to quickly run through this part. I think Jay's hovering over me right here. Metasploit looks like this. I'm basically setting up the base. I'm setting up the IP addresses for what you're going to connect to, and then I run Metasploit. About 3 or 4 commands, and then I can take over your machine if you connect to me. Beyond this, what can you do? Well, you can do a whole bunch of evil once you control the network. Anyone seen this before? It's a little evil girl that started the fire. Not really, but that's what people. That's what the internet theme is. But anyone heard of Firesheep? No? Yes. Firesheep is basically listening in on the network. It's a Firefox plugin. You click it, it starts collecting. Anyone that's on your network that tries to log into Facebook, tries to log into Yahoo, tries to log into several of the web services that do not encrypt their traffic, it steals your credentials and you can impersonate them at that point. Evil Grade is another tool I like to use. What's an upgrade? Upgrade's an update, right? Well, what do you think Evil Grade does? It pretends to be the update. It's listening in on the network. When you make an upgrade request, like Adobe Acrobat, it goes. Your machine is going to call out to Adobe to download that update. Well, my Evil Grade program will intercept that and send down a program of mine that I want to take over, to have run on your machine. And then when it asks you that question, like every other upgrade program does, are you sure you want to upgrade? What do you do?
Yes.
Say yes. This is another tool that recently came out that I really like called Creepy. Now, if you're listening in on a network, if you're going to your, like I said, Firesheet, you've already taken over their MySpace or Facebook account, or Twitter account or Flickr account. What Creepy does is it trolls the information on your Facebook account or trolls the metadata on your pictures on your Facebook account or any other photo site, and pulls out GPS data from that. So if you're using Twitter and Twitter will clock into Foursquare.com. Anyone know what Foursquare does? Foursquare is an application some people use to check in where they've gone to. Yelp is doing this now too, where you check in the restaurant you go to. Well, Creepy pulls all this data, and you can massage it and mine it all you want, but you basically have a schedule of where you go most of the time. So it's fairly creepy. Social engineering toolkit is what I described a little earlier, where I can reproduce the login website of anything I want. I just pointed to bankofamerica.com. It'll reproduce that website exactly. So it looks like the sign-in page. Once you sign in that page, it will take that credential, forward you to Bank of America, and sign you in so you don't know anything's wrong. Except I already have your password. And Beef is the last tool that I really like. It's the browser exploitations framework. Basically, if you browse to one of my websites that I used Beef to create, I can take over at least the browser, but more than likely I'll take over your machine. Okay, so there's a lot to go over. Mitigation, what you want to do is, first thing, you can not use Wi-Fi, but I don't think anyone's going to do that. The other thing is don't use unknown access points. That's one thing you can take care of, but it's up to you. Never use open Wi-Fi or WEP because it opens you up to a whole load of stuff. WK2, you should use it with strong PSK. Don't use, if anyone doesn't know about the 500 most used passwords on the internet, go look it up on Google. Make sure your password's not in there. Because I guarantee it's in a dictionary somewhere. Firewall your mobile device. They're starting to offer firewalls for mobile devices now. You might want to do that. And VPN. There's free VPN software out there. Set up a VPN, which is virtual private networks. Use that software so everything's encrypted, and you're not relying on a third party to encrypt you. So I don't know if we have time for questions. Do we have time for questions?
Take questions.
Okay.
Rather you do.
All right. Any questions? Yes.
We got a few questions.
Okay.
What's the free VPN and what are the
One.
and what are like some of the legal issues with people cracking these websites?
Okay. So first question, I should have actually mentioned that. I'll take the second question first because it's important. I've introduced you to a whole load of tools. All of these tools, if you use it on something that's not your own equipment, will land you in federal jail. You cannot use these tools. You can freely use them, set up your own access point, configure your own access point, and break into your own system. That's fine. Just don't break into anyone else's. As soon as you do that, and if they find you, you are in jail. They are making examples of anyone who's a quote hacker or terrorist nowadays. The second question about VPN. Free VPNs, there's one that you can use a public VPN server for called Hamachi. You can just look it up. Or you can just look up open source or free VPN and get an idea. But Hamachi is one that I know of. OpenVPN is another one. Any other questions? Yes?
All right. At home, I have a repeater. I have a repeater that's connected to a wireless access point. Is there any way where I can stop I can stop my repeater from broadcasting my SSID?
It depends on the repeater. What are you using for? What's the brand of the repeater?
I didn't know it either. Yeah.
What was that?
Hockey.
Probably you'll have to look up the manufacturer documentation, but more than likely not, because it's not a big brand. More than likely they didn't put the functionality in there. And like I said, it's becoming where broadcasting your SSID kind of doesn't matter now. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
Does everybody know the difference between?
Oh, you're keeping this?
Yeah, I keep on your mobile, what is a 3G and what is a Wi-Fi? What's the difference? Yeah, I think people, yeah. You want to tell them?
I'm
what's the
sorry.
difference?
Well, I said earlier, what do you pay for it?
Oh, okay.
3G or 4G or Edge it's using cellular network. You're connecting to the cell phone company's cell tower and using their data from there. You are paying for that whenever you see your plan and it says you only have 300, 400 megabytes that you can download, or 1, 2 gigabytes. That's counting against your limit. Wi-Fi is, and if you have it at home, you're using your own internet connection. If you go to the Starbucks, you're using Starbucks internet connection, and you're just connecting wirelessly. Any other questions? Okay, I think we're done. Hopefully I didn't run over you.